This video is a continuation of the series I've been doing on the best GRE words to learn. This list was compiled by Prep Scholar, not by me, and the way they did it is they combed through all the Power Prep tests and other practice materials from, for example, Manhattan and Kaplan, and they saw the words that come up the most often, 2 or more times. And this is a compilation of all those words. There are 357 in total, but this video will just cover from O to Q. Interestingly, there are more O and P words, I would say, than almost any other letter in the alphabet. So make of that what you will. If you haven't seen my other vocab videos, please do check them out. I also have a playlist on them. But without further ado, let's get to the list. Just quickly before I start though, I'm going to look at the word without looking at the definition on the right. I'm going to tell you how I would use the word if I know the meaning. Most likely I will. And then we'll look at the definition on the right. Of course, you can look at the definition the whole time. And then we'll compare how I described the word with how they did. Anyway, starting with obdurate. I think of that as someone who is obstinate, stubborn, basically. I can see later on there is the word obstinate coming up. But someone who is stubborn, set in their ways, intransigent, doesn't change their mind. They are obdurate. They are enduring, duro in the middle, in their current position. They don't change. They are obdurate. What do they say? Stubborn, obstinate. Again, I didn't look at that, but that is exactly what I said. Self-praising here a little bit. Anyway, next word. Obscure. That's interesting. It has 2 different definitions. There's the physical sense of something being obscure. It's like cloudy, hard to see. Maybe it's in the distance. Maybe it's covered up by something. It's not clear, transparent. It's obscure. Or you have in the sense of obscure bit of knowledge. It's something not common, unusual, out there, maybe a bit esoteric, known only to a few people, an obscure bit of knowledge. There's also the verb to obscure something is to cover it up. If you obscure a crime, you're trying to cover it up and make sure people can't see it clearly. What do they say? Mysterious or not well known? Yep. And the verb to cover something up. Exactly. Obsequious, great word, does come up a lot. It means sucking up to someone, flattering someone, being a sycophant. To be obsequious is to praise someone, but you're not really meaning it. You're just sucking up to them. And you've got that sec in the middle there, which is kind of like sucking up to someone. So that's a good way of remembering it. Obsequious, what do they say? Yes, to be fawning. Very similar, sycophantic. Helpful, but it's disingenuous. You don't actually mean it in your heart. You're just putting on a facade, a play. Now we have obstinate, that word we saw earlier. Very similar to obdurate, means stubborn. You might have a great question. What's the difference between obdurate and obstinate? I wouldn't know. You can look up though the etymology of those 2 words and that might give you a clue about how they evolve in different directions. I'm quite curious. After this video, I might look up the differences between those 2 words. What does it say? Stubborn, uncompromising. Obviate. To obviate something is to make it redundant. The new advance in technology obviated the old way of manufacturing that product. A good way of remembering it is to obviate something is essentially to make it obsolete, redundant, not necessary. What do they say? To forestall the need for something. That's slightly different to what I was saying, to prevent. I didn't know the second one. I didn't know that to obviate something is to prevent it happening. I might actually quickly pause the video and then check dictionary.com to see whether my definition was closer or their one. Okay, I've checked that and it's very interesting. It's actually both. So dictionary.com does say that to obviate something is to render it unnecessary. Like I said, to render it obsolete. But it's also to prevent. You're anticipating something and so you obviate that risk. It gives the example of you're preventing a difficulty before it arises. You're anticipating that. And I didn't actually know that obviate had that second definition. I thought to obviate something is just to make it redundant, to make it unnecessary. But it's a bit more active than that. The second definition talks about you're eliminating a problem before it arises. You're obviating that difficulty. So I knew the first one, but not the secondary definition. So I've learned something there. What about to occlude? To cover up, to make not obvious, to make obscure. Like the clouds occlude the sun. They cover them up so it's not clear anymore. I actually think the etymology might be linked to that. Occlude, cloud, like you're covering up the sun, you're occluding something. They say to block or obstruct. Perfect. Occult. Well, like the word cult at the end, to do with mystical stuff or weird, like witch-like or magic, black magic. It's the occult. It's magical, but in a negative sense. Black magic, weird stuff. So they say just the mystical or supernatural, but definitely the word occult has more of a negative connotation as maybe witchcraft or cunning, scheming. What about to offset something? The best word I would think of is to counterbalance. One thing is in one direction and the other thing offsets it, negates it, balances it out, goes in the other direction. Like two negatives in maths offset each other and you end up with a positive. It's almost like they're set off each other, offset. What do they say? To counterbalance or counteract. Yeah, my exact word. Okay, next one. Olfactory. Great one to know. Doesn't sound anything like it, but olfactory, the word, means to do with the nose, to do with smelling. I remember learning that in secondary school and thinking, what's olfactory got to do with the nose? Is like a factory in your nose? I have no idea. But anyway, olfactory does mean to do with smelling or the nose. What do they say? Relating to smell or the sense of smell. Exactly. Good one to know. And you can think of that weird little link that I thought of, like a factory in your nose, olfactory. So in a sentence, it might be something like, she tapped into her olfactory senses to sense danger. She smelt something bad, basically. Omniscience. Omni is all, science is knowledge, so someone who is omniscient is all-knowing. Typically, they're talking about God, but anything that knows everything. Omniscient or omniscience. They talk about the quality or state of being all-knowing. That's where etymology really helps there. If you know omni is all and science is knowledge, omniscience is the knowledge of everything. Or to be omniscient is to have the knowledge of everything. Onerous means burdensome. It's on your back, it's weighing you down, it's onerous. Not easy, difficult, burdensome, onerous. I know it kind of looks like one-rous, but you pronounce it onerous. What do they say? Difficult or burdensome? Yeah, that word is so apt, burdensome. Hard to think of another word really to describe onerous with. Anyway, opaque is the opposite of transparent. Something that is transparent is clear, see-through. Something that is opaque is like a plaque. It's a block. You can't see through it. No light comes through. Now, obviously, you can talk about an opaque window as one that's completely blocked up. But also, if someone has an opaque expression, for example, it means you can't read it. It's blank. You can't tell what's going on. So often it's used in a more metaphorical sense as well. Not see-through, they say, blocking light. Yeah. Opportunism, great word. If someone goes for opportunities, you can accuse them of opportunism. I know it sounds like a good word, right? Someone who takes opportunities is an opportunist. Isn't that a good thing? No, the word is derogatory. It's an insult. It means someone who grabs opportunities to make mischief, taking opportunities for their own self-interest, not for the greater good. For example, if everyone is out watching the fireworks, an opportunist will go and rob their houses. That is opportunism. It's a definite insult, meaning taking opportunities to act in self-interest. They say the practice of taking advantage of opportunities, exactly what I said, as they arise without concern for morality or ethics. I think I hit that nail on the head. Anyway, the most important thing is you learning the definitions and you're getting my take, but also their take, so you can make up your mind the best way to remember these words. Of course, you can on your own check the etymology of these words and make up mnemonics, ways of remembering the words on your own, but the more of these great words you know, the better. Opprobrium, lovely word. It means criticism or attack from others. I faced universal opprobrium, harsh criticism. It's the opposite of the word approbation. Approbation is praise. Opprobrium is harsh criticism. Almost like these people are opposing you with opprobrium, harshly criticizing you. They just say criticism or condemnation is a bit closer. You're damning the person. You're really attacking them. Condemnation. Whereas approbation is praising someone. To oscillate It means to go back and forth, to fluctuate. Oscillate is usually between 2 points, so like a pendulum oscillates left and right, whereas fluctuate can be in many different directions. That's one way to remember it, but in general they kind of mean similar things, just to waver back and forth, not be set in one direction. What do they say? To swing back and forth between 2 points, poles, or positions, exactly. To oscillate. I guess in a metaphorical sense, you could say the person oscillated between being in favour or being against the bill, going back and forth between two positions, if you want to be metaphorical. Ostentatious, over the top, over-adorned, luxurious, ornate, ostentatious, showy, showing off basically. They say overly showy in a way that is gaudy or vulgar. Yeah, it's not a compliment. It's saying you're kind of showing off and it might not be in good taste. Bit too much luxury, basically. Gaudy, in bad taste. Too ostentatious, or the ostentation of that house was ludicrous. To outstrip, interesting. To outstrip is to kind of overtake, that's how I would describe it. It's like one person's doing one thing and you do it slightly better or slightly faster. You outstrip them. This doesn't have to be necessarily about stripping, mind you, but it could be about any activity. If you do it better than someone, if you outdo them, you outstrip them. Usually in terms of pace, how quickly you're doing it. What do they say? I'd be interested. To overtake or outrun. Yeah, it's that sense of pace, how quickly you do something. You outstrip them. Not necessarily that you're doing it better, just you're doing it faster. To overshadow, very common word. It means to cast shadow on something. It could have been glorious and full of light, but the negative event overshadowed it, cast shadow over it, cast some negative feeling over something that could otherwise have been a good, bright thing. Her death overshadowed his birthday celebrations. His callous victory speech overshadowed his achievements. Cast a negative light over something, or clouds over something, obscuring what could have been great. They say, yeah, it could be literally casting a shadow over, like the clouds overshadowed the fields. Or they say to appear more notable than. I'm not actually keen on that definition, because if you just read that second one, you'd think maybe it's a good thing, then they're just a bit better than them. But no, it's more of a negative word. If one person's achievements overshadows the other, it's not just one person's a bit more notable, a bit better. They're actually casting the other person's achievements in a negative light. It's a much more negative word than these definitions imply, I think. That's my opinion. Anyway, we're now on to the P's. Painstaking. You might accuse me of being painstaking in these explanations, basically taking great pain, being very detailed, scrupulous, meticulous, going over every detail. Not rushing, taking your time, almost sacrificing. There's that word pain at the beginning. You're staking some pain. You're sacrificing to make sure it's detailed and thorough. What do they say? Attentive to detail, meticulous, painstaking. I know it's got that word pain in there, but it's a positive word. If someone's work is painstaking, it's very detailed. Partial is a negative word. It means biased. Biased in one favour. There might be two parties, and one person favours one of the parties, and that person is partial. They are biased, party at the beginning, towards one party. What do they say? Wow, they say incomplete. Now, there's a couple of things to say about that. First of all, yes, I missed that different definition for partial, but they missed my definition. We just completely walked past each other here. So they missed my definition, which I think is more likely to be tested in the GRE, to know that partial means biased. And that is, you can check it on dictionary.com, one of the definitions of partial. I missed the more obvious definition in the sense of it's incomplete. It's a partial truth. It's not the whole truth, it's part of the truth. Or that building is partially complete. It's not fully complete. And yes, that is the definition I missed, but I think that definition is the more obvious one because of that word part at the beginning. It's just partly complete. And I suspect the one the GRE would test is the secondary definition, that to be partial is to be biased. So I missed their definition, they missed my definition, but you now know both definitions, and that's the good news. Interestingly, the very next word, partisan, is going back to my definition, following one party. That word party at the beginning there. Someone who is partisan believes in, follows one of the parties. Not both of them or all of them, just one of them. Is an adherent, you could almost say, if you're going to go really far, demagogue. They really follow the principles of one of the parties. They're not impartial, which I should have said actually is the opposite to partial. To be impartial is to be disinterested, above the fray, not biased. To be partial is to be biased. Or to be partisan is to be fully on one side. As they say, a devoted supporter of a group, cause, or person. Lovely word, basically just means obvious. That's a patent lie. That's an obvious lie. Not quite sure how we would remember that. I guess it kind of sounds quite similar to blatant, and blatant means very obvious. Patent is an obvious lie. Actually, that's the two words they use, blatant, obvious. Now, you might ask me, what's the difference between patent and blatant? I wouldn't know. You could look up the etymology. I'd be curious to know. I know some of you are thinking, doesn't patent also mean like to gain the rights to something, like an entrepreneur patents a certain invention? Yes, it also means that. Much more likely though, the GRE will test this adjective sense of the word, not the noun patent. They don't test these obscure nouns as often as they do adjectives and verbs. Did you know that to be patent is to be obvious? It's not just to gain the rights to an invention. Well, now you do. Paucity is the lack of something. If something is in very short supply, you would say there is a paucity of that thing. There's just not much of it. It's not common. We don't have much or hardly any of it. Sounds similar, and it is similar to the word to be poor. To be poor, you have a paucity of many things. You have a lack of many things. So there's a big link there. They say scarcity, which is again the lack of something, and poverty, being poor. To be pedantic, some people accuse me of being pedantic. It's definitely a negative word. It means to be overly detailed, overly scrupulous. You know, we saw earlier, painstaking is like a praising word, saying that you take a lot of pain to focus on the details. If someone goes too far and cares about too many small details, you could say they are pedantic. Too focused on the smaller things, overly scrupulous. They say overly concerned with irrelevant detail, just being fussy at that point. Pedestrian, very similar to other words we've seen in this vocab list, mundane, quotidian. Pedestrian, not exciting like a car whizzing by, but like a pedestrian just walking, strolling along, boring, as they say, monotonous, run-of-the-mill every day. You can compare like a pedestrian strolling to like a Maserati whizzing along, and the pedestrian is the one that's maybe a lot more boring. So it is a noun as well. To be a pedestrian is someone who's walking. Pede at the beginning is legs, someone who walks. But in this adjective sense, it means something that's boring, mundane, quotidian, everyday. Perfidy, or to be perfidious. Evil, cowardly, or more accurately, you're betraying someone basically. So to accuse someone of perfidy is to like accuse them of backstabbing, going against you, being treacherous, unreliable, a backstabber, a traitor basically. And if they commit that perfidy, you would say they are being perfidious. Be interested to see what they say. Treachery or deceit. Yes, deceit meaning lying. They weren't honest. They betrayed you. It's treacherous. Perfunctory is just you're doing the functions. There's no heart in it. You're just doing it casually without much effort. Very functional. You've got that funct at the end. Just going through the motions. They say done without much effort, care or thought. Exactly. If something is peripheral, it's not in the center. Think of the word perimeter. It means the outside, right? Peri is the outside. Meter is measure. Measuring the outside of a shape. Perimeter. If something is peripheral, you pronounce it peripheral, it's on the outside. It's not really super relevant. You could say that friend was peripheral in the party, kind of stood on the outside, not really interacting with people. Or that objective is peripheral to our mission. It's not the main thing that's on the side. Let's focus on the main objective. So that's a great way of remembering it. Perimeter, peripheral. On the edge or periphery, not centrally important. To permeate is to pervade, to spread through everything. Sometimes you get it physically, like water permeates through the land and sinks down in the water table. Or sometimes you get it metaphorically, like a sense of unease permeated the room, spread throughout, pervaded. They say, my exact word, to pervade or penetrate throughout. Exactly. Perseverance, not giving up, carrying on all the way to the end, being determined, resilient, never giving up, persevering. What do they say? To persist, exactly, in the face of obstacles. Yeah, that's a good definition. To be perseverant isn't just going through the motions. You maybe faced problems, difficulties, challenged, and you never gave up. You persevered all the way to the end. To peruse something. First thing I think of with peruse, just like reading a book. You're browsing something, you're perusing it. You're reading it without a huge amount of care. You're reading it, maybe not 100% of your attention's on it. You're just casually browsing, reading, perusing it. And to be honest, that would probably be the only definition I know. Let me think. Peruse, to browse, to think about something briefly as well. But I'm going to check because I can see there's 3 definitions here. Did I miss some? Oh, 2. To read something carefully and closely. And then the second one is to read something informally or quickly. That is so weird. There's 2 different definitions there. I thought it was the second one, just to peruse something, to read something informally, quickly. And yet, contradictory, the first one is to read something carefully and closely. I never knew that there was that contradiction, and they're saying context is critical. I honestly have only ever heard it in that second sense, where you're just perusing, like someone walks into a bookstore, just peruses a few books and doesn't buy anything and then walks out. Just browsing. It's another word for browsing. I've never heard it be, I guess, I have heard it briefly mean like to think about. Yeah, I hadn't heard that first one. I'm going to now pause the video and check dictionary.com and see what they say. So dictionary.com agrees with them in the sense that they say there are 2 definitions. You can read with thoroughness or you can just be browsing something. And that's really interesting. I've never seen a word which has 2 definitions that completely contradict each other. So that word is entirely dependent on the context. It could mean to read something carefully or it could mean just to browse. Depends on the context. I never knew that. I only ever knew the secondary definition. Either way, you now know both, and that's the main thing. That's what I care about. Pervasive. Do you remember earlier we talked about to permeate means to pervade? Pervade again, it means to spread throughout, to be universal. To be pervasive is to have permeated everything, pervaded everything, become ubiquitous. It's everywhere. As they say, it's found everywhere, it's widespread. And you can imagine, as they say, this often has a negative connotation. If something is spread everywhere, you often say that when you're talking negatively about something. Mosquitoes, maybe, or cookies on the internet. Okay, making great progress here. Phenomena. Wow. That's like a word I know, but it's quite hard to describe. A phenomena is like an occurrence that's quite special. It's not quite as special as saying it's a phenomenon, which is a slightly different word, which means burst of brilliance. She's a phenomenon. She's a real talent that bursts out. Or that performance was phenomenal, just shocking, brilliant, like a lightning strike. A phenomena is more broad. It means an occurrence of something that's special and notable, but not necessarily stunning. For example, the occurrence of that particular brown rock on that mountain is a phenomena we need to study. It's an interesting occurrence. It's notable and we should study it, but we're not going as far as to say it's phenomenal. It's a similar word with a slightly different definition. As they say, it's something that happens. It's notable. So it's good for you to note the differences here. You've got those sudden, striking, lightning 2 parts of the word, phenomenal, or to be a phenomenon, but then the actual broad, general word, a phenomena, is just an occurrence. It's notable, it's an occurrence worth thinking about, but not necessarily stunning. But if you describe a footballer as phenomenal, you're saying they're stunning like lightning. Or that music album being a phenomenon means it took the world by storm. Phlegmatic, easily confused word, interesting to pronounce, like phlegm, but nothing to do with phlegm, I guess. Phlegmatic is being cool and composed under pressure. He was very phlegmatic under harsh criticism. Facing great opprobrium, he remained phlegmatic, cool, unruffled. Not a word I would actually use. Do I know it? I know pithy means like a short, witty comment. So pith, I guess a pith. It's like the core of something, like the pith of an argument. I don't think I know. Pith, short, to the point. That's pithy. I'd have to check that one. Pith. Okay, I was almost there with my first attempt. The essential substance of something, the core, the kernel, the nucleus, the pith of something. That was one I wasn't fully sure on myself, but good to know. To placate is to make calm, make placid. So you have a placid lake, a calm lake. Well, to make something placid and calm is to placate, to calm someone or something down. They say to calm, especially an angry or upset person. Exactly. Now, it's not just the noun that we all know about, the material that we use, plastic. It also just means in general, moldable, malleable, easily shaped. Her mind was quite plastic at that young age, easily molded and shaped. So it can be used metaphorically, and many people don't know that. They say, well, you've got the adjective there, of course, made of plastic, but then more importantly, easily shaped or molded. Next one, and this is a fun one. Platitude. A platitude is a positive comment, a bit of praise, but you don't mean it. It's cliched, not said from the heart. Like if you really didn't like someone who died, you just said, he will be greatly missed. You don't mean it. It's a comment, it's a bit of praise, but you don't really mean it. What do they say? It's trite or cliche. Yeah, completely unoriginal, not said with any heart. It's just a mere platitude. Plausible means possible. It really is feasible. It could have happened. That doesn't sound made up. That's actually plausible. The fact that he won 5 victories in a row, you might think that sounds impossible, but no, that's plausible. It definitely could have happened. The opposite being implausible. If you think that thing was not possible, you say, no, that's just implausible. People would never believe that. Or if it is believable, you'd say, that's plausible. You could believe that. As they say, believable, reasonable. Plethora, wonderful word. It means an abundant amount of, myriad. There are a plethora of explanations for her behaviour. Pretty sure it's a Greek word. Not sure of the etymology, that would be a good one to look up. Either way, a plethora means an abundant amount of something. A surplus or overabundance of something, yeah. Next one I would have thought most people would know. To plummet is to fall down quickly and sharply. After she made those comments, people's belief in her plummeted, went down quickly. After he took over as CEO, the value of their stocks plummeted, went down off a cliff, down quickly and suddenly. As they say, to fall quickly and far. Polarize. Well, like the North and South Pole are far apart, to polarize something is to split it up into two groups that are far apart. You could say at the moment, America is quite polarized between the Democrats and Republicans. The country is split with a big difference and not much middle ground. It's polarized. It's spread between two poles. Polemical, appropriate to have that word after. If something is polemical, it's political and attacking. A polemic, for example, is an article that a journalist might write really attacking one side. You would call it a polemical article. As they say, it's angry, hostile, harshly critical. As we learned earlier, full of opprobrium toward one side. It's partial, another word we learned earlier, against one side. It's angry, hostile, aggressive. It's a polemic, and the person is being polemical. A bit like with the previous word, you could say that person is coming from one of the poles only, focused on the other pole. They're being polemical. This is the one that's confused with phlegmatic. Phlegmatic is cool, composed. Pragmatic is practical. Not focused on big ideas, just getting the job done. Practical, using the tools at hand to get things done. What do they say? Yeah, practical. Yeah, they just use one word to say everything I just said. It's a definite praising word. If a person is pragmatic, they don't get lost in abstractions, they just focus on getting things done. Precarious, vulnerable, at great risk of danger. If a ball is balanced right on the edge of a cliff, you would say the ball is in a precarious position. It's so close to danger. That word pre at the beginning, it's not quite there. It's before the danger. The danger hasn't happened, but the position is precarious. The danger is imminent. It could easily happen. They say uncertain or unstable. A great example would be her position as CEO was precarious. Like she's still in that position and nothing's happened yet, but it's so close to her maybe being fired or resigning or something. What about the next word? Preceded. Came before. Do you see how that pre at the beginning means before again? Where if something preceded something else, it went before, as they say. If I precede you, I come before you. Precipitate. So you have rain or hail or snow, and that's precipitation. That's the noun. But then for the GRE, it's much more likely to be tested in the verb sense. To precipitate something is to cause it to happen. The thing that precipitates something is the thing that causes it to happen. It's the thing that came before. Again, with that pre meaning before. Her actions precipitated a sharp response, caused a sharp response. And if we look at what they've done, they've got my first and second definition to cause, as I said, and then like snow and rain, the noun, particulate matter formed within a solution. But I forgot the second one. So well done them. If something is precipitate, and notice you pronounce it a bit differently, if it's precipitate, it's hasty, not well considered. You haven't pre-thought about it too much, it's just precipitate. So you as a student have a tough job. You've got 3 different definitions to know about this word. To precipitate something is to cause it to happen. Then if something is called precipitate as an adjective, it means it's hasty and rushed. And then snow and rain is known as precipitation, something that comes down from the sky. They're giving a slightly more chemical definition, which I'm not familiar with, particulate matter, but I just think of precipitation as those things that come down from the sky. Call me a layman, but there we go. What about precursor? Pre means before, so precursor is something that comes before something else. Usually something that warns you about something else that's coming. Like those heavy clouds are a precursor of great precipitation. Like a harbinger, a warning that something bigger is coming. That's how I think about it, not just a forerunner. Prescient. Do you remember earlier we talked about omniscient being about knowledge? Prescient, very similar. Scient is knowledge, pre, before. So based on the etymology you've learned in this video, to be prescient is to know things before they happen, to predict something. So to show prescience is to show great predictive powers, like you're oracular, you're an oracle, you knew about it before it's going to happen. Obviously, this doesn't just have to be supernatural, it could just be you're good at guessing and predicting what's happening. You're prescient. You're like a prophet, prophetic. As I say, it doesn't have to be supernatural, can just be practical as well. The next one, presumptuous. You presume. At this point, you're probably guessing the pre means before. To be presumptuous is to think in a certain way before events have actually happened. I presumed I was going to win, but I actually lost. I thought I was before the actual battle, but it turned out differently. Presumptuous is an insult. It means you think too much before you've actually done something. They are putting it in a more social way. They're saying overly familiar, invading social boundaries. I would say that's a secondary definition of the word. The main definition means someone who makes assumptions or presumptions, has certain opinions before the things have actually happened. But secondarily, someone who is presumptuous tends to take liberties, get into people's personal space, do things that they assumed would be okay, but are actually not okay. Her eating all the food before the guests had arrived was very presumptuous. She presumed it would be okay, but it wasn't okay. To prevail means to win, basically. If one side prevailed over another side, they won and were victorious. Maybe the first word that doesn't link to pre being before, let's find out. Yes, to succeed with respect to vanquishing an opponent, winning, basically. Yes, there is that secondary definition that I forgot, to convince someone. But that's used quite formally and not very commonly. I prevailed upon him to change his mind. Much more commonly though, you'd use the first definition about succeeding. We prevailed, we won. I guess you could think before, as in like we came before them. Like we finished first and they finished second. We prevailed. To prevaricate. It basically means you say a load of words and they're kind of partially true, but they're misleading. Basically, you're being beguiling, you're lying. Without technically lying. Basically meaning you're saying a bunch of words and they're giving one impression, but the actual truth is different and you know it. She asked him where her stuff was and he just prevaricated. Didn't give a straight answer. Was deceiving. They say to evade or deceive without outright lying. Yes, not a clear lie, but just misleading. Okay, now for the last few words here. Pristine, untouched, pure. Like the pristine woods haven't been affected by man in any way, for example. Or the pristine beaches were clear and no litter at all. A great word. As they say, untouched, clean, pure. Probity, great word. That's a hard one. It's not one that you use too often, but to show probity is to show kind of honor, integrity, like you're standing up for principles. You're displaying great probity, gravity. Kind of like the word proper. You're being proper, appropriate, showing probity. Quite hard to describe. How do they describe it? Exactly my words. Integrity and honor. Yeah, I can't think of an easy way to remember that. It doesn't really easily link to another word. It does sound a bit like integrity, I guess. Probity, integrity. So that's a good way of remembering it. What about prodigal? There's that famous parable in the Bible, the Prodigal Son. It means someone who's wasteful. As we saw earlier today, ostentatious. Giving into luxury, ornamentation. The prodigal son was the son who spent too much compared to the other son who didn't. And then they basically wasted their inheritance and then went off into the desert. And then the father accepted him back later on, even though he'd wasted a load of money. And the other son, who hadn't been wasteful, basically got a bit jealous that the other son had been let back in. Anyway, that's the parable of the prodigal son. But prodigal means, as they say, a reckless spender. You spend way too much money on frivolities, luxuries. Linked in a way to the next word, prodigious, it's enormous, immense, gigantic. So to be prodigal is to spend an enormous amount, an immense amount. If you have a prodigious supply of food, you have an immense supply, a warehouse full of food. And also linking to the next word, to be profligate, very similar to prodigal. You're wasteful, just giving things away, flinging them away, profligate. As they say, extravagant, wasteful in a moral way. All three of those words linked. Proliferate, kind of similar. To proliferate is to spread out, to get bigger and bigger, like rabbits proliferating. I guess you could say pro-life at the beginning. Well, rabbits are very pro-life because of the rate. Look at the ending of the word rate, the rate at which they spread out in life. They just multiply. The numbers of rabbits always multiply, or rats or whatever. They proliferate. They love life so much, the rate at which they spawn new ones with them just goes up and up and up. Or the number of web domains are just proliferating all the time. They just keep on multiplying. Propitiate. Ooh, that word rings a bell, but I'm honestly not entirely sure. Propitiate. I think it means like to ask a favor of someone, I think. To beseech, to propitiate. It's kind of like to ingratiate, like you're trying to get something from someone, I think. Propitiate. I actually am not 100% sure about this word. Let's look up. To obtain a special favour from someone, especially a powerful person or deity, by performing a pleasing action. Yeah, it's more like the second definition, to appease someone. That comes back to me now. It's like there's an angry god and you propitiate them. You give them a gift just to please them and keep them on side. Yes, now it sounds right. So her husband was really angry, so she propitiated him with a spontaneous gift. You calm them down or you get a favour off them by performing that pleasing action. Yes, I had forgotten that word. And the last four words here. Propriety. Being proper, sober, doing the appropriate thing, being decorous, decorum, etiquette. If someone is showing propriety, they're showing the proper way of doing something. As they say, they're showing appropriateness, manners, decorum, yes. Prospective is like potential. My prospective client is the one that's not my client yet, but hopefully soon they will be. Pro, you're looking forward to them being something, whereas retro, you're looking back. So if something is retrospective, you're looking back at something in the past. If something is prospective, you're hopeful about something happening in the future. As they say, it's a potential. It's likely and applicable to the future, not guaranteed. Now, there are only 2 keywords in this list, and the second one is one I've mentioned already, but it's a great word. Anyway, the first one. Qualification does have that obvious definition of being a bit of paper you can put on the wall. Like if you pass a GRE, that's a qualification to get into business school or other schools. Or if you pass an engineering exam, that's a qualification to become an engineer. But it also has a secondary definition that I bet you might not have known. It's like a qualifier you put on a statement. She's a great student, but let me add a qualification. On Sunday, she's quite lazy. It's like you're adding a little statement that just adjusts the first thing you said in a slightly different way. It's a wonderful house, but let me issue one qualification. Its walls are quite weak. It's like one adjustment or caveat to what you just said. And there are the 2 definitions. It's a credential or qualification, a bit of paper on the wall, for example, but it's also a modifying statement. And now let's end with a word I've mentioned several times in this list and in previous videos, quotidian. Everyday, mundane. Do you remember the similar word that we saw, the synonym we saw earlier in this list today? It was pedestrian. Just strolling along. Not the Maserati, just pedestrian. Everyday, boring, monotonous, or as this wonderful last finishing word is, quotidian. Dia at the end, like a day, quotidian, just happening every day, nothing special. As they say, relating to the everyday or mundane. A wonderful way to end this OPQ list. That was a lot of words in one video. I'd be very appreciative to any of those who made it all the way to the end to leave a comment. But either way, you have really shown that you're dedicated to learning new GRE words and new English words in general. So well done to you. Have a wonderful day.